Happy days. All right. So like we had just said, want to thank Will for coming on. Will, for those that don't know your background, know a little bit about you, why don't you go ahead and just introduce yourself and where you're at and where you've been and, kind of the journey you've taken.
Yeah. So Will Townsley, I'm an assistant head of strength and conditioning at IMG Academy. I oversee all things baseball here at IMG, everything from our middle school guys all the way up through our, pro guys in the off season. So my journey, right, kind of started, at Wichita State, started as a volunteer into a GA, into an assistant, and spent, I think, almost 4 years there. Then jumped over to the Atlanta Braves, where I worked as a coordinator for 3 years. At the end of that last season, I had a chance to jump over into some tactical stuff with some special forces training, which was awesome. Like one of the coolest jobs I ever had. For those who know, what happened, what was that, 2014 with SOCOM and Congress and in budget cuts, man, I was a little bit of a salary cap casualty and, got let go, but was fortunate enough to make some connections at IMG and, timing kind of was a big piece and was able to land here and, been here. This is my 8th year. So 8 years at the end of the summer. So,
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I guess I hadn't fully realized that it was that long at IMG when I looked at your, when I was looking at your bio.
Yeah.
Go for those that don't know a lot about IMG, talk about, you mentioned the middle schoolers. How far back, for lack of a better term, does IMG go? Because I think a lot of people are familiar with the high school. What are the grades you guys serve? And then from other things that I've learned, you guys train pros there. You guys have tons of camps out there. Talk to people about the complexity that I've heard it is working at IMG, just with all the moving pieces.
Yeah. So the school itself is at this point, like middle school, high school. Some of our different sports, right, like especially golf and tennis, can have some younger kids. And actually, let me back up, right? The sports we have are football, basketball, baseball, lacrosse, soccer, track and field, golf, tennis are the 8 that we have. Like I said, probably the majority is at, 16 plus. But like I said, we have a middle school. There's a handful of younger kids in baseball. Kind of 7th grade is about as low as we go. Are they big enough to play on a full size field? I mean, that's kind of our limiting factor. So yeah, it's 1,300 kids across those sports. Yeah. So again, it's not like a normal school where, again, I'll speak with a little bit more detail to baseball, right? Where you think, all right, here's your baseball, team at a high school. I've got 12 teams, 220 athletes that range from post-grad, a bunch of varsity teams, a couple JV teams, and all the way down to that middle school. So yeah, that's kind of a similar feel across a lot of sports, right? Like soccer runs U19 down to U11s maybe. I think is about as young as they go. Like I said, tennis, golf span a big broad range. Basketball's in a similar spot. So that's the boarding school. Right on top of that, right, like camps, especially like summer is a huge deal. Our kids go away and then we open up and have, summer camp experience, right, where kids can come and train and, anywhere from 1 week to 3 to 5, I think is what they offer out to. And, they come and get it, right? Like it's a specialized in sport training, where they get obviously on field, on court work, and in the weight room, they do the rest of our, holistic performance approach, right? Where they get mental skills, they get nutrition, they can, work with our leadership coaches. It's a pretty kind of dynamic thing for kids to walk into. And then on top of that, then we get outside groups that come in and use the facilities and train. Again, whether it's pros who come in for like an off-season program, right? Like I have with, baseball players, to some of our tennis pros who almost are kind of residents here, to, I think this year we had 6 to 8 like MLS teams who kind of did their spring training on campus. So yeah, big dynamic environment with a lot of different moving pieces.
I'll talk about with the, the mental piece that you guys have going there, and I guess how that fits into the greater, the APD that you guys really take a lot of pride in. how does that coincide, having that many people, that many moving parts? How are you guys able to make it seem on the outside very seamless and very the ideal high performance model?
Yeah. So again, like this is where it's kind of cool because I don't think there's a right or a wrong answer to it, right? Like in every sport, in every situation, can kind of integrate these different pieces a little bit differently. And again, I'll speak to baseball, which I can dive into the deepest, but we have a team of mental coaches, just like we have a team of strength and conditioning coaches, and we've done different things, whether it's they'll do their mental skills like on the field, they can do a skill integration with it. We've done it in the past where we've done mental skills incorporated into strength and conditioning sessions, and worked on things that way. So yeah, man, how do we do it? I think it's kind of magic sometimes because there are so many moving pieces and it's kind of just so intricate. But I also think at this kind of age group, there's not necessarily a wrong way to do it. It's just finding which way works best. So whole lot of trial and error. I think we found a lot of ways that don't work just as well as we found a lot of ways that do work.
What would you say is probably the biggest, you've been there for almost 8 years, so to say the biggest one takeaway, but if you could list off like 3 to 4 things that like, hey, this is the biggest takeaway that I've found in terms of how to make it, because you've had so much trial and error, how can we make it as seamless as possible? Your big 3 or 4 rocks as your takeaways.
Yeah, like, oh, I think like the biggest one, right, is like year over year, like no team is the same. And so again, I think things that I did 3 or 4 years ago that worked really, really well probably would not necessarily work with the group of athletes I have right now, right? And so kind of being able to always make those adjustments and kind of understand who you're working with and how to hit those certain messages home. That's kind of the big one. Again, like also being able to is not be scared to like pivot and try new things in terms of that integration. Those are really the big ones, man. Like in terms of like 3 or 4, and it's it's just understanding the group that you have and like meeting them there where they are and giving them what they need. Mm-hmm. And it's probably something I've gotten better at, like the longer I've coached, right? Like figuring out who your group is a little bit quicker. And like, so part of it is we get so like more turnover. Than you
with
probably would,
kids
like,
or staff, you're saying?
With kids too. So again,
because they just like they burn out, or because they realize they want to go somewhere else because they're not getting the attention they need.
So we get very few kids that are here for 4 years. Right. So again, with like the majority of our kids being
baseball only, or for the tennises too?
Probably across the board.
Okay.
Like if you looked at cross section of age, right, 16 to 18 is where we're heavy, right? It's like junior, seniors.
Yep.
There's a lot of kids who are in for 1 or 2 years and then gone. And so in terms of, let's say, creating that traditional like team culture, right? It's something that churns a little bit faster, right? And the teams, don't necessarily have that same cohesive thing that you would see if you were at a traditional high school or college level where it's 4 years of a group coming up together. So being able to identify stuff a little bit quicker because of that situation, I think has been a kind of a useful skill set, but also makes it tough at the same time.
Do you think you guys have tried to steal any of the models from, maybe with the basketballs, because they've got a lot of the one and dones? Like, have you guys tried to steal that? And, selfishly, I'm asking that, and there might be members listening that are, FBS or FCS where they're plucking the transfer portal, and it's a pretty similar situation where they're trying to build a team, but you almost have a bunch of mercenaries. But we just saw with the LA Rams, it can be done when you have a strong, cohesive core. How do you feel like that is, being able to, not only at IMG, how you guys are doing it, but what would be kind of your piece of advice to teams that are trying to do that now, with whether it be the transfer portal or one and done in college basketball?
Yeah, I think there was your culture has to be a thing, right? Like,
what do you guys call your culture? What do you guys define it as?
And yeah, like, and I'll kind of speak selfishly, like just for me, right? And what I expect to see from my groups, right? Like are very process driven of like, when guys walk in the door, like, what are we doing? Why are we doing things? Details matter. you know, this deal that we're building towards something bigger. And then again, I get a wide group of athletes, right? That could be a whole lot of different things. I've got guys who could be a first round pick here in a couple of weeks to, you know, guys who are probably just using the sport as a means to get into a school. But like, are we learning things? Are we training on purpose? And then are those details? Because again, like, we can do a training, it's going to show up in every other aspect of your life, right? Because if you're going to create a hierarchy of things they want to do, like the weight room tends to be kind of towards the bottom. So if we can create good habits here, those habits should bleed everywhere else, right? Like into school, into practice, into life, hopefully. And really just being able to set those expectations. And so again, like, you could see it, you know, as guys come in, if we have expectations and the handful of guys who are kind of holdovers year to year kind of start it. And then a lot of it, like, I give a lot of credit to our people who kind of bring people in. Again, like, you're trying to bring in the right fit, which is the same thing that you're going to see, you know, collegiately as you go and recruit. You don't want to necessarily just get the guy with the best talent, because you could see that with like super teams in the NBA.
Or the
Right,
Dallas
like,
Cowboys in the NFL. Like,
or the Dallas
they're
Cowboys.
just-
Right?
they're like the definition of never being able to fully figure it out.
I mean, you could use the Nets, right? Like,
Oh yeah.
that's a team that I mean, there should be no question, right? Where you have, you know, Kyrie, Kevin Durant, you had James Harden, but what, now they're down 0-2 after 2 games. So, you know, it's one thing to just stack talent, but then when you start to have a culture in place to some level of, it's just as simple as expectations and communication, then you can start to really stack things up and build.
So in terms of the process, like you were saying before, when we were talking about culture and identity, which is generally really hard if you have consistency, you know, say of a team or organization. What have you noticed, you know, considering you've been there for 8 years, in terms of these new generations, you know, how they relate differently, and what do they identify either with or culture wise with? Have you noticed, if you notice anything?
Yeah, like, I actually had a really interesting conversation with one of our like baseball coaches about that, like, the other day, right? And kind of, he made the point of, like, the kids aren't different. It's just the things that are around them, like, have changed. Like, some of those core character traits aren't necessarily different. I don't know if I'm 100% on board with that one, right? Like, because kids are a little bit different than when I was young. But, you know, again, I think when you can kind of boil things down to, you know, just as simple as like goal settings, like, what do guys want to achieve? Then that's where you start to see a lot of like similarities, like generation to generation. Like, people kind of want the same things. And, you know, I feel like as part of my job as a coach, it's how do I teach you the path to achieve your goals as well, right? Not just fight gravity all the time. So, yeah, I mean, they're a little bit different. You have to connect a little bit differently. You know, just some mannerisms, right? Like, social media is a different beast that you have to navigate with guys. And the Google machine is tough because everyone's now an expert at training. And
They've always been an expert. Google has just allowed them to be even more of an expert, and so is social media.
Have links to prove it.
Yeah.
Right. Or something like that.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I was cutting in. Sorry.
No, you're good, man.
I was going to say that I would probably be, I mean, I wasn't part of the conversation, but I would probably be more inclined to your end, because the environment does have a lot of influence, you know, in how we evolve as people, and, you know, in terms of experiences and language and how we communicate. So, you know, I'm 38, and the youngest people I was coaching were born in year 2000. I was pretty much finishing school. So I did notice that what's valued and you know, the order of some hierarchies are not exactly the same in a different world, you know, and there is a overwhelming amount of information, and, you know, the paradox of choice. They have so many things to choose and so much information and so many people telling them stuff. And, you know, they get a young athlete and immediately does kind of decently well, and they judge their performance or their career trajectory by likes or followers, or, you know, people reach out and all these mental coaches and whatever. So I guess you can't really be the same as, you know, as it was 15 years ago. Probably similar issues, just to a different power, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's the similar threads, right? Like, similar kind of roots, but, you know, you might go about it a little bit differently to connect a different way, right? Like just different life experiences, to your point, kind of change everybody's perception, and their perception is their reality. And whether I like it or not, that's what we have to deal with, and how we have to kind of move forward.
Do you think that there's any, early specialization fear when you guys are doing things like that? We had a guest on who's a strength coach in the NBA, and he, bounced around at college level as well. And he talked about how there's so much wear and tear on these kids than they were beforehand. You seeing that now with the baseballs, or maybe golf and, tennises? Are we wearing the tread on these kids? And by we, I mean sports performance coaches and professional, right? We talked about all the mental and all that stuff. Is that wear and tread too soon?
I mean, yeah, like it's something we're definitely very aware of, right? Like our whole business model is early specialization. So, as a performance staff, that's something we have kind of eyes on, and we almost take a little bit of pride of how do we undo it to a certain extent, or how do we fill in those gaps that kids aren't getting because they're dialed into just one thing. So, yeah, it's a tricky thing, right? Like, because I think there's certain sports like golf, let's say, where, I mean, it's kind of shown that early specialization can be beneficial. There's other sports like basketball where you look at what kids look like at 19, 20 right now, coming off of year-round AAU and high school and competitive things, and you just see some of the injury trends collegiately or even in the NBA, and it's like, man, those guys have 10 extra years on them.
Is baseball more year-round down there because it's warmer too, or?
Yeah, it's almost nonstop. So, in like,
you hear the deep sigh, Fernando. That was the
he said,
man,
and you can see
that
he
was
dying
I wish it
inside.
wasn't like that sigh, but it is.
And so, like, the hard part, right? Like, and this is the thing I try to explain to guys is
coaches or players.
Both,
yes.
Right. So, and like our coaches get it. Like we have coaches that completely get it. At the same time, again, we're a business, right? So we have to, I don't want to say acquiesce to the clientele, but again, there's a customer service aspect, and there's a reason guys are coming here. Part of it is to showcase. So, hey, there's part of it where, yeah, like, how do we develop skill? Can we do it smart, right? Like not just work hard, but work smart. That hopefully takes care of a lot of things. But like the development side, right? Like if I've got let's say a sophomore pitcher who throws 80 miles an hour, and listen, man, you keep going to every showcase you can because you think you're going to get seen. You're right, you're going to get seen, but what are you showing them? Right? Like if you're just showing the same old thing over and over and over, you're not showing an improvement that's going to catch their eye. You're just giving them more ammunition to, put marks on you. Yeah. So, that's kind of the big thing that we dive into. And again, like I said, I kind of had the heavy side with some of the coaches. We also have some coaches that really get it, right? And especially with like our pitchers, like our pitching staff's done like such an unbelievable job last year, right? Because we're still in the middle of this year, so I don't have numbers yet, but we had one shoulder injury for 200 something guys.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah. I mean, so again, like there's awareness, right? It's just, I don't know the way out of this like machine.
How many athletic trainers do you have working with you in baseball specifically?
3.
Some colleges don't have 3 people work with theirs. You talked about something that I hadn't even thought about. What is it like, you as a strength and conditioning coach at a college? You're already having to you play the game with sport coaches and administrators to a degree, and maybe players somewhat, but not as much. Maybe at your higher level schools, not necessarily for me. But when you talked about the fact that you might have some of these kids that come from money, they're really good at their sport, and they might be able to tell you off. What is it like trying to work with that type of athlete? And are there any situations where their parents are also like big time donors, and they can essentially be like, hey, I don't like so-and-so, and boom, out the door, something like that? Because I feel like I've seen that at the pros where, the stud athlete that they're going to make their franchise quarterback is like, hey, I don't like Johnny, the strength coach, and he's gone.
Yeah. Like, so we'll just work backwards. Like from that standpoint, like we're pretty safe here. Again, like our administration does a good job of like, we are who we need to be. And then even from, and again, this kind of changes sport to sport, like, so the structure being like with baseball, we've got a director who oversees all of it, right? Almost kind of like almost kind of like a GM. And I mean, he does a great job of supporting anything I do. So I very rarely even feel any heat from a parent if there's any to come through. The other piece being, and this works with, those high-end kids as well as the parents, right? Like your communication, right? Like if you're able to, it all starts with relationships, right? Like, and if we can have relationships and understanding and can see point of views, it's going to allow you to coach and give feedback, especially probably like critical feedback, where it doesn't then feel like an attack. And so, again, like at every level, that's like something I've really like grown and strived to be a lot better with. Going from probably early in the career of kind of strength coach to like, people manager. And, I think I do a good job, or try to do a good job of connecting with the athletes. So again, like if they understand and they can have a conversation and they let me coach them hard, like it's not going to get back to a parent, right? The same thing with, if I can have a conversation with a baseball coach, the baseball administrator, and they understand and they trust, and I can push back and give feedback where it's needed. Like it's all a big like welcome thing, because at the end of the day, we all have the same goal, which is trying to get every athlete to be the best that they can possibly be. So
what's it like trying to get the coach buy-in down there? Is it where they're on, shorter contracts where they're like, hey, I want to keep winning now? Are there any challenges that you've seen? And if they're not, okay, give us the secret sauce. Like what is it that you've seen that's been able to help with coach buy-in down there?
Yeah. And so it's wild. Like, again, I've got 30 baseball coaches, right? So with 30 different personalities, and
that's unbelievable.
Yeah. And so it's 30 different personalities, 30 different backgrounds, 30 different experiences with previous strength and conditioning coaches. So again, it's just trying to understand them, kind of who they are, where they come from. And then, I've gotten to different levels, right? Like I've gotten to certain levels with certain coaches where they're completely bought in and they want my input, and listen, I've got like free reign to do whatever I think is right. And then I've got other coaches who don't necessarily care what I do and probably don't necessarily agree. Just kind of that old school baseball. Hey, I played the major leagues for 10 years and
we should be running more polls.
But like we've gotten to the point, because I've been able to produce some results where they just don't get in the way, right? Like they're not hurting what we're trying to do. Right. So, and again, it all just comes back to like the relationships. And then, again, I've got like support from the top, which is very useful because that's my, always have a bit of a trump card with that. But it's the understanding of like, we want the same thing. There's certain times you give and you take. Just how do you always kind of build that towards like trust and that relationship? I think that's communication and trust, man. That's the secret sauce. And, like I said, being here almost 8 years, like time is probably the other component of that like I don't necessarily love using myself as an example, because who's ever in one spot with a set group of coaches for 8 years, right? Like, and I haven't even had the same group of coaches. I think there's only 3 or 4 that were here when I got here. So, but like once you start to create that, it's almost kind of like with your like culture with an athlete, right? Where you set it with your returners, and then people. It's the same thing with coaches, right? Like the longer you have a relationship with somebody and somebody else walks into it, hopefully there's a little bit of, kind of osmosis of trust that bleeds across that staff.
How many of the sports scientists have been around and, talk to us about the technology piece or the sports science piece that you guys have in place? You've been there for 8 years. How up and running was it 8 years ago? Is it pretty in its infancy stages? And then, after hitting on that nail, how is it, seamlessly integrated into your guys' training in the weight room and on the field?
Yeah. So, our sports science staff, right? We have 4 sports scientists, which again is not enough for 1,300 people. So as strength coaches, right, we're that extension of the sports science staff and try to do the applied sports science. When I first got here, it was pretty bare bones, like a couple tendos, probably at best, right? Like, and since then it's kind of evolved and grown. And again, like what I do with baseball, right, where we have force plates where we test and monitor, like we monitor guys weekly on those. We have different tools for velocity based training. We got 2 weight rooms. The one I'm in has, elite form at every rack. Our other weight room has like connectivity issues. So we still use like gym wears and some push bands over there. But again, like we have all the same tools. We've got Nord boards, we've got, a bunch of other pieces. But, for me, it's the, how do I use, some of those feedback tools to, and again, like some of our other field sports have Catapult, or I think soccer has a different GPS device, but every sport kind of uses things differently. Again, like with baseball, right? We use force plates to test and monitor. We have our whole testing battery that we kind of go through to walk guys in to figure out who they are and what they need, right? From movement screens to some of your more traditional, broad jumps, vertical jump.
What movement screens do you guys use there? Sorry to interrupt.
No, you're good. So, man, if we got some time, I'm going to take you on a historical journey here. So
please do. And I wonder if it ends with the use of technology called Tracer.
No, it doesn't.
Okay.
But so again, like for me, what I have done, right? Like my evolution here at IMG, like when I came in, I was kind of that mindset of like, man, I can use my eyes every day, and that's my movement screen, which I feel like was lazy of myself at the time, right? Like, yes, but like, no, like, how are you really tracking anything? And so, I got to a point of like, man, we have to do better than this. And so this was like 6 years ago, like just kind of revamp my whole like testing, right? Like, it started off with an inherited protocol that I switched, and then boom, we revamped. And so it was like a 3-phase approach, right? The first one was, I called it like our range of motion day, days where I got every single guy in our academy on the table, goniometer. We measured hip internal, external rotation, shoulder internal, external rotation, shoulder flexion. We'd done Thomas test, T-spine rotation. We did some like scap, like movement quality of things. And that was day one. And so that was like static. What's our capacity? What's available? Then we do an FMS, at the time, which was all right. Again, like, how can we move a little bit? And then like
the traditional, 3-point, or 1 to 3 with all 7 movements, 21.
Yep. And then we had like our performance testing on top of that, right? So,
and by performance testing, you mean any of your vertical jumps, broad jumps, anything like that?
Yeah. So that battery we did vertical jump, broad jump, lateral broad jump, rotational med
both ways, or just
both ways? Both ways.
How did you did you average the two, or did you just add it up?
Scored both of them and looked side by side for like asymmetries.
Yep.
And then the last piece was a 60, right? Because it's baseball. They love a 60-yard dash, but we throw gates at 10, 20, and 30.
Okay.
So we would take that and look at it. Like, and again, like at this time, I'm doing all of it in Excel and like color coding it and dumping everybody in. And, it was kind of a labor of love, right? Like, it sucked because it was a whole lot of data entry for 200 guys doing all that. But you got a really good idea of now buckets of guys and groups and where we good and where we not. And
now, did you do that? Sorry to interrupt again, but did you do that good 3 days in a row where it was like, hey, boom, 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 or was that different times?
That was 3 days in a row.
And how frequently were you retesting it, to just not to make it the only thing that you were trying to do, but if you only do it once and then never, like, is it one time a year, twice a year, quarterly?
It was intake, right? So like first week of school.
Yeah.
Sometime before winter break, usually that like second week of December is where I really like it.
Yep.
And then postseason. So again, if I were to break it down, like 3 times a year, probably like preseason would make more sense. But the way we go, right, when we come back 1st of January, like we're hitting the ground running. So having to do it on the front end makes more sense. So anyway, we could take all that information and look at it, and like I always go back to I had this kid who was super twitchy, right? Like huge broad jump, great lateral broad, was a pitcher, average at best, maybe med ball throw. And then you look at his screens and his hips didn't move at all, right? It was all like T-spine, like, so he couldn't load his hips to like actually push and drive. And, he was like an 80 mile an hour maybe pitcher. And so we saw that. We're like, cool, you're bleeding energy right here. That was the thing we really attacked. And then that year he was 88 from the left side. So all of a sudden we see a problem, can identify it. Hey, I bet this helps. Sure enough, it did. And so again, we did that for a few years, and then kept like tweaking some of the tests to get rid of the stuff we really weren't looking at, maybe add in something else that we thought did. And then we got to a point where the FMS just being the FMS, like how can we do better than that? So kind of between the two of those things, then we kind of pivoted to an on-base U screen, which is like the baseball version of TPI.
Gotcha.
So the TPI guys created this baseball movement screen. And the best part about this was like I was aware of it, just hadn't had a chance to go. But our baseball coaches got excited about it, right? Because again, using that TPI model.
You're using, you're being baseball specific, man.
No doubt. And so not only that, but they went over like movement faults within pitching and hitting, and then how it tied to movement screens.
So we had movement screen, they're genius.
So right. So they went through, our baseball coaches went through a bunch of this and like started to see these connections. So that's what we pivoted to. Got rid of the range of motion stuff on the table, got rid of the FMS, started doing that. And then of course, like as we got more force plates, we got rid of like jump mat vertical test, did counter movement on the force plate. So that's kind of how we've evolved, right? So now it's a lot more sport specific. We get coaches involved with the screening process. And so, I mean, even like in December when we were rescreening guys, so I was screening a group of pitchers and had two pitching coaches sitting there with me, and they were talking about how much the screen made sense because how guys could or couldn't like finish certain pitches.
Now, were they screening with you, or they just kind of watching you do it?
They were recording for me.
So it's all recorded, so that way you have like a stored version of it too.
Yeah. Yep. So they recorded it, and then I mean, there'd be certain times where we'd flip and I'd record for them and they'd go through the screen.
What was it called again?
On-base U.
On-base U.
Yeah. And so like the other cool part, it's like, I think it's 15 different like movements for pitching and I think 11 or 12 for hitting. And so
that many?
Like, yeah. And it's
for like base running in terms of their ability to, push off or something like that.
It's literally just hitting and pitching and like the ability to rotate and move and some freedom. And so like the cool part about it, right? Like if you pass, let's say as a hitter, like 10 out of 12, like we know which two you're not good at. And so again, like our coaches could retest those, maybe not like a formal standpoint, but like there's an internal hip rotation test, right? Like, hey, if you're struggling to internally rotate your hip, like you probably can't load your hip when we go to hit. So one, now we can coach around it, so they can coach better because they're coaching the athlete to what capacities they have. Lets me have a chance to know like, hey, I need to establish more room for them to move. And then because it's such a simple test, they can just one-off look at it to see if it's getting better, and they can start to change their strategies and how they coach.
No, that's all. Like, first of all, those TPI guys are genius for doing that. Like,
yeah.
And the reason that I asked you about so there's this movement capture analysis system called Tracer that that I'm familiar with are trying to push towards people. So it is, again, more objective rather than subjective with the FMS. And I'm trying to, learn more about it. So I guess I was selfishly hoping that you guys had heard about that system over there.
No, I know our sports science was kicking around a couple different, again, like markerless, simple.
Yeah, same thing. It's a marker list. You're supposed to just do some movements and be able
to
squat,
overhead things. Squat, something like that, right?
Yeah.
Like a couple things where you can just crank.
The problem that I found with it is my athletic trainer and I were messing around with it, and he literally would squat and like bring his knees together and just be awful. And it actually didn't pick any of that up. And so we were going through it. I was like, how can we actually utilize this? Like, this is not going to be actually useful information.
Right. Yeah. That's where, again, we've looked at a handful of different things, and, even back when I was getting everybody on the table, like there were just certain things that, again, with that marker list, it's tough to pick up like joint rotation. Yep. Right. Like, so I felt like I was missing out on certain pieces at the time, which is why I was always a little hesitant.
All right. So then the next question that I had, about baseball and that was awesome with that FMS, version that you guys have there. Talk to us, and to those that aren't as familiar with it, because I wasn't until about 2 weeks ago when I was talking with the guy that does baseball here. What are, some of the just complete differences in terms of the sport, and the people won't really appreciate, because they think like, oh, you just either throw the ball or you're, a position player and you hit the ball and you occasionally run. Like, what are some of the, big archetypes in terms of if you're going to be at the corners or playing the outfield, or if you're a center fielder, second base, shortstop? Like, what are kind of some of the big rocks, and how you're able to, if you need to, train those guys differently based on any positional needs, not only at IMG, but just like moving forward as you're getting them ready for, professional?
Yeah, man. And that's
it's a loaded question, right? Like,
yeah, no. And that's it's a different thing, right? Cause like, I know there's certain guys who that's how they think, right? Like corners, right? You're big, you're strong, you're going to hit for power. Middle guys are, be quick and fast. And like, I try to look at it as more of a, who are you and what's your style of play, as opposed to necessarily what's your position. And then really the big one on top of that is just like, how can I make you as athletic as possible? Because I've yet to come across a coach that says like, man, you're too athletic, I need you to tone it down. So, with all like the testing and things we've done, I've been able to run a bunch of like correlations, especially with our force plates, on like what metrics tend to matter in terms of manipulating certain on-field like traits. And so that's kind of the thing I've been trying to attack the most. So again, it's the force is kind of a really big, important piece, as weird as that sounds, right? Like, it's how much force can we possibly produce? And, that kind of tends to be the backbone of everything I do, right? Like, how do we create force? And then just how do we manipulate time within it? So, compared to, let's say, some of the other field sports where like a certain thing of what you're doing is also like creating armor to impose your will and have some contact. Baseball is all about like, can I create as much force as I possibly can and transfer it as efficiently as possible into a batter ball? And, so again, we look at that, and it's, can we produce it? Where are we leaking it? And then how do we improve it? And then probably the next step beyond that is then looking at, static production of force versus dynamic. So again, like we did a mid-thigh pull versus, counter movement jump.
I was just going to ask you, were you doing the dynamic strength index?
Yeah. So not so much like that pure dynamic strength index, because again, I've got a ton of guys to get through, and I just don't like, I hate like feeling like I'm burning training time.
Yep.
But again, like, what can I get off of, a counter movement jump, and if nothing else, like a modified RSI.
Will you do anything in terms of looking at like counter movement jump versus static, your squat jump?
So I've done that with some pro guys. I haven't done it with just the volume of high school guys.
Gotcha. What were things that what are certain numbers or cutoffs or things that you were either red flagging or noticing with the pro guys?
So like with my pro guys, it's kind of a twofold with this one, right? And I'd love to give you a great answer, but I feel like I don't have one, because
come on, I wanted the golden. This was right.
I know. And like, again, with the pro guys, like your first question is like, man, what kind of effort are they going to give me at 8 o'clock in the morning for the fourth time they're doing this? Yeah. Right. Like, so look, there was some interesting stuff in the sense of like one day they'd look really, really good. And you're like, man, like, this is what I want to see. Like, you must be feeling good today. And then the next week we, hey, let's double check that. And it's just, I don't feel like trying very hard. It's like, okay, that's fine. Save it for some sets and reps in the weight room where it matters a little bit more. So, I think we did it, and that was more just trying to throw shit at a wall and see what stuck with those guys. Try to get some insights, and I'd love to tell you something great, but I don't have it yet. So
what is it like training a sport where the mindset is as laid back as it would be, in my opinion, in terms of success, right? Because you can be, if you bat 350, you're really damn good. If you bat 300, but that also means you failed 65 or 70% of the time. And, when you were in the majors, and so that's 162 game season. So losing, a game or two is, again, not the end of the world versus sports, some of our listeners, it's way more, imperative. Like if you're a Power 5 guy listening to this, if you lose one game, now you're not even in the college football playoff, let alone in contention for, your conference championship. What is it like training a sport where the failure rate can be so high? And what would be something that you would recommend to somebody who's either going to be new coming into baseball? Like, hey, this is a mindset shift that you need to realize is real.
Yeah, it's definitely different, right? Like, and it's definitely a sport that lends itself to, process over outcome. So again, like, I think the better you can get wrapped into like that and consistency of like just pounding away, right? Like knowing, hey, you dropped this, but like the cool thing about baseball is you play again tomorrow and you have a chance to come right back. So
hey, just move on.
Yeah, like you better figure it out fast, right? Because you don't want, let's say, your last out to be your next out, right? Like we're still caught up on what happened and it caused you to strike out again or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
So I think there's definitely we talk about like feel in baseball, right? Like to work in baseball, you have to have a feel. And I mean, it's that ability to understand that culture and that, again, that kind of laid back way of, it's the go with the flow, to understand who the people are. And
it's probably also a little bit of a dichotomy, right? Because I'm thinking about, the baseball baseball team here at Towson. Wow, sorry about that. And they actually like to slang around and lift some weight, right? Like, so it's not like they're always laid back. Like, there are some dudes that I've literally seen them trap bar deadlifting 550, 6 plates, getting after it. So it's not completely laid back. I'm assuming it's something like that there too.
Oh yeah. Like, let me tell you, like when the boys come in and get after it, right? Like it shakes the building.
Yeah.
Right. Like, I mean, again, you talk about that. I had a junior in high school who we did trap bar pulls for speed that hit a peak velocity of like 1.6 with 500 on the bar.
Oh, wow.
Right. Like boys, like they
he's
come in
shrugging it at the top.
No, I mean, it was just, he's a monster. He's unreal. Yeah. But
is he good at baseball too? Because one of the things, like this, the strength coach here, he was like, man, they just made cuts and all the strong kids got cut. Like, he's like, fuck.
That's what I think the best thing about my situation right now is my strongest kids are my best kids.
That definitely helps it.
Like strongest are the best, the most bought in are also our best, right? Like, and not just bought into coming in and like grinding, but like the little stuff, right? Like they do their recovery work better than everybody else. They are on top of their nutrition better than average, right? Like they're good at all of the little things. And that's kind of the thing we talk about to set them apart, right? Like, again, being at a college level, when someone walks in the door as a freshman, there's like some level of, let's say, newcomer program that until they get out of that, like how much are they really going to compete for playing time?
For me, 1/20, right? Like,
right. And so it's how fast can you walk in the door and like show your coaches that like, hey, look, I get it. I can do this. Like I'm more advanced than a normal freshman. And now you're playing, like competing for playing time. And so, again, like I said, our best guys really get that and buy into it and get some guys being pretty successful right now at the next level.
So your official title is assistant head of strength and conditioning, right? You're one of those, that higher level position. From what I've understood there, you guys do a really good job at mentoring and doing some continuing ed with some of the younger coaches. What are some things that you guys are doing there to continue to develop those, underneath you in the chain of command, but also laterally to just continue to help everybody grow and, push the envelope of that?
Yeah, no, I think we do a whole lot of stuff across the board, and it's an ongoing thing, right? There's certain times a year where, let's say like during summer, right, where it's easier, where we can get a whole lot of people and do a lot of like classroom type, like, hey, we talk and we go through stuff and things like that. I think we get a lot of informal mentorship just in our big, bullpen offices, which are great for, man, you toss a seed out there and all of a sudden you get 5-6 people deep diving everything they know down a topic, right? Where it's some of these informal opportunities. I think one of the big ones that, really can pay off is like, how do you lead up in terms of like, how do you communicate with sport coaches is something that we really have been trying to work on with a lot of our staff of just, again, going back to those relationships, right? Like how do you relay information and get that understanding and that buy-in, not just within like our realm, but can spread it out, whether it's leading across, performance team, sports med, nutrition, mental skills, to, again, like the sport coaches, and getting them to not understand, but just giving them information that's tangible and usable. So that's another big thing that like I've been trying to get into a lot more. And then even just some of our younger coaches, right, or some of our more fresh out kind of entry level positions of, hey, look, I've been doing this a certain way a long time. How can I give you insight into my way of thinking? And again, like just because I do it a certain way, like there's a whole lot of ways to do things right? Like, which is the kind of beautiful part of strength and conditioning, right? Like there's definitely more than one way to get from A to B. Here's how I do it. Here's my thought process. Here's what I'm looking for. And we have a whole lot of coaches that do, try to open up their brain to let people in and see that. Are
you guys forced into any like kind of cookie cut, like, hey, like not for nothing, like, okay, that's like you said, there's many roads leads to Rome. And I think we all agree with that. And there are more roads that are more efficient. So with that being said, as a head guy or as anybody above the chain, is there certain like, hey, you know what? Yeah, you can do your own program, but like, you know what, with baseball, you're not allowed to do Olympic lifts. Or like, hey, if you're going to do Olympic lifts, nobody's allowed to do them from the floor. Everything starts from the hang. Like,
and so, yeah, on top of that, do you have like, say because you have so many people and so much going on at the same time, do you have, say, a set time frame? So, gym time has to be between 45 and hour 15 because the next group comes in or this comes out, the logistics side of things. So sometimes you have to squeeze in whatever you have in your time and space available, right?
Yeah. So like, I'll start with that one, right? Like, so our schedule is just a nightmare to look at, right? Like it's just, if you've ever seen like an Excel sheet that makes you want to throw up, it's probably our schedule, right? Because it's, again, think 1,300 athletes, we have,
you guys break it up where it's like all academics in the morning and then school and lifting at night, or
like, so it's flipped, right? Like there's probably not half. Maybe it is half. I don't know.
Highest paying to lowest paying.
So there's certain sports.
Who doesn't?
Right, certain sports that again, like that train in this weight room is more of our field sports, right? So football, girls lacrosse, like most of our boys soccer all like train in the morning and then go to school in the afternoon. And then like girls soccer, baseball, or at least our varsity baseball, and lacrosse and track and field do the opposite, right? Like they train or go to school in the morning, train in the afternoon. So there's like always something going on. And then, as I'm sure you guys know, right? Like, again, if you have field sports, you're either going to train before or after practice. So then you get into these kind of tighter windows of demand for the weight room. So, there's always something going. Like, again, the schedule looks like a nightmare, but it's hour blocks is kind of what we all have set up. And then it depends on what the sport and the coach want in terms of how many times a week are they training, I guess, as well as then like time of year. So like for baseball, we're in here 4 times a week in the off season. And then right now when we're in season, it's twice a week. So, it all kind of varies. But then going back to your question about like, almost how do we set parameters for programming, right? There are, certain big things that kind of fit into our philosophy, whether it's, probably program wide, right? Like hey, like, are we emphasizing movement patterns? Are we being age appropriate, level appropriate? Things like that kind of are the big tenet that everything lives under. And then even as it goes to our different sports, whoever kind of leads up those sports can kind of set a little bit narrower, let's say like guardrails. Yep. And, at least for me, like, and what I like to do is set them pretty wide. Like, again, maybe here are your hard stops, but it's not a 2-lane highway we're working on. We're on an interstate and there's plenty of room for someone to move. And, how do we go about certain things? And I'll let you work through stuff and give you feedback and watch you coach and pick your brain and ask you questions. And, I don't necessarily want to give everybody the answers because that's not how anyone's going to learn, right? Especially if I'm trying to prepare a coach to go on where I'm not there to give you your answers. But if I see a major mistake coming, like, sure, we'll probably intervene on the front end. But if there's just little details that, hey, it could be better. I'll let you make those mistakes and we'll ask the questions and guide you through it after the fact and let you learn from experience rather than just this. The other piece, and I think we almost touched on it, but didn't, like, a big part of here too is development as opposed to like having to win. I think you kind of mentioned that about like coaches, right? Getting turned out. There's only maybe 2 or 3 teams that have a decent amount of pressure to win on campus, like some of our national teams.
Yep.
Everybody else, it's, yes, we would like to win, like, because winning is a lot more fun than losing. But at the same time,
sure beats the opposite, right?
Yeah, like, it's way more fun. But at the same time, like, are we getting better at the sport and are we preparing people to go to the next level, right? So again, if I've got a team and I'm thinking about, like, we've got like a junior national team, which is like freshmen, sophomores, like a bunch of studs, but they'll go play a hard schedule that they're not going to win all their games. And we know it. And part of it is because we're trying to push them out of that comfort zone to develop a little bit different. So we're okay taking some losses. Hopefully we get surprised and the boys play up and we go. But, again, like, that's kind of some of the stuff that we can carry over to the weight room too, right? Like, how do we push you to develop? Because, man, we should not be anywhere near our best when we walk out the door, right? Like, we should be laying a great foundation for the next level to then keep building off of.
That's actually one thing that I was kind of worried about with some of the, the kids leaving IMG football wise. Like, hey, are they going to be too far developed? Like, what are you playing your ace too soon, right? And I know Kira said that before. Like, if you play your ace in the hole too soon, you don't have it, and now you've robbed the kids of the stimulus and the adaptation twice. When they, first time it was inappropriate, now again when they need it, you've already played it.
And you know what, man? Like, that's, like, I don't want to say battling, but like working through that right now. Just looking at like the last couple of years of training and trying to figure out, like, I guess more of a story than like just thought process, because that's more fun. But like, so going back to 1920, right, that year right before COVID, I had a bunch of guys who'd been around for a little bit, and our off-season program, for our varsity guys, right, we had kind of broken out into 3 tiers, right? So we had like our development tier, which was sophomore and freshman, which was just, again, basic training and just starting to expose them to more opportunities, a little bit higher intensities. And then we had, let's say, our juniors and seniors that were just regular juniors and seniors. We started to do some triphasic work, really trying to emphasize some eccentrics and some isos. And then I had like my really strong guys who, we started to get into like the super max, like split squats.
Did you truly go down that rabbit hole of like the ASFM and like oscillatory stuff with them on triphasic?
We pieces of it. With that one, we were just throwing like the just French contrast, and we got to that. And like I said, that was the year we then lost them because of COVID.
The year that nobody remembers.
Yeah, the year that really like screws me up when I talk about things in the past, because it's like an 18-month black hole. But like, so again, like using our force plates and looking at things, like, man, we were really pushing some guys and like saw some really cool stuff off of that. And so then that next year, right, so coming off of all the quarantines and lockdowns and who knows who was training how much, again, what's the appropriate thing is, man, we're not doing that. We're going to scale it back. And I train almost everybody at that like developmental level that next year, right? Like no triphasic, just trying to work in some higher percentages, push a little bit more, just a little bit more volume for some of the older guys, but not a huge difference. And our results were the same, so now like going into this year of like, man, like, where do I really need to sit? Because to that point, right, like a novel exposure is only novel one time. So if I can get somebody to a level really truly doing the most basic things possible, and I save that trump card for the next guy, like,
when he needs it, right? Yeah.
Right. Like, that's the one that's really could, give him an opportunity to slingshot forward. So
that's what I think a lot of coaches that are familiar with Strength Coach Network, and they're familiar with things that Keir said, and for the forums, it's either that tube of toothpaste, you touch it anywhere as a young athlete, the toothpaste comes out, and then eventually you have to get more specific. Or in a most recent conversation he had, it's like when you first get married, if your wife asks you to do the dishes, you're pleasantly going to do it. That's the young athlete, versus after a couple of years, she might have to throw the pot and pan at you to get you to go clean the dishes, as your senior level player. But I definitely think that that's something a lot of coaches need to hear, because like we talked earlier about influencers and Instagram, you see all that special stuff, but those people aren't saying like, hey, exhaust 1x20 or, you know, pure linear periodization, easy strength stuff till it, you know, stops working.
Yeah. And that's the, you know, again, we'll do some more kind of analysis at the end of the year and see, hey, how much of that do I need to probably meet somewhere in the middle, because now everybody's getting that full, like, kind of chronic load of training back under their belt.
So, you know, where is somewhere that any of our members or any of our people listening to the podcast, where can they learn more about you and kind of follow you on social media to kind of continue this journey that they've had by, you know, learning from you today?
Yeah. So my Instagram is WL Townsley. I don't do a lot. Like, it's kind of one of those things like, like it's always like my New Year's resolution. It's like, man, let's do more. And then I don't. That's my goal. Shoot me a message if you need it. I usually check that. Bug me if I don't. It's fine. Yeah, I mean, reach out, man. Like, I love having conversations, love talking to people. Like, I mean, all this is just trying to eyeball problems and figure out through different lenses of what are we trying to do. So the more I can, you know, help somebody else, and I'll probably learn something from you at the same time talking to you. So.
No, this has been awesome. So I appreciate it. And I know our members and people watching this will get a lot from it, because, you know, selfishly, I already wrote down lateral broad jump. I do a single leg to double leg land broad jump when I look at my guys. I do a regular broad jump, a continuous 3 in a row, and then I'll average it. I do a single leg to double leg land, both legs for asymmetry, but you know, definitely going to start looking into the double leg medial, because we'll do some single leg medial on any of our RTP lower extremity people, but I already stole that, and I'm going to talk with our baseball guy about the baseball specific stuff. So I know I stole stuff, so hopefully our, you know, viewers and members did as well.
Yeah, same here, Will. Appreciate you. And yeah, it was great.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Bye.
See ya.
Congratulations on making it to the end of the video. Why don't you celebrate by watching more videos just like it? You can also help us on our quest to placate the algorithm gods by liking, sharing, subscribing, and commenting. Thank you.